We extend our preview on the expected GDP data with Economist Elize Kruger now. Thank you as always for your time, Elize. Much of the expectation is of somewhat of an improvement at 0.7% of a bounce back, which really wouldn't mean too much because we know the third quarter GDP numbers saw that decline of 0.7%. What's your take?
Good morning to Misang. Yes, I think we will see a positive number today, i.e. growth compared to the contraction of quarter two. It was quite a surprising outcome in a sense if you think about the heavy load shedding that we had especially in September. But then again, if you think about quarter two, we had KZN floods. We also had a prolonged gold mining strike. So in a way, quarter two is a bit of a low base. So despite the fact that we had many challenges in quarter three, our energy-intensive sectors managed to grow, both mining and manufacturing, and those are data points we already have from StatsSA. We did see the consumer under pressure, so retail sales per se dropped on a quarter-on-quarter basis, but then again wholesale trade increased, and also accommodation and so on. So on a net effect, I do think we will see a figure today in the order of 0.3–0.4% quarter-on-quarter.
Quite interesting, and that surprise would be welcomed given the current landscape of the economic climate in South Africa. But let's delve deeper into the factors at play this time around. You mentioned load shedding. You also mentioned that there have been some disruptions in the form of strike action and more recently Transnet. And prior to that particular industrial action, Elize, we saw that ports, there were challenges there with regards to Transnet operations way before that strike action, because they've declared a number of force majeures this year alone. What's expected on that front?
Yes, so the Transnet strike, if you recall, was actually in October. So that will only impact negatively on the quarter four GDP growth number. And I think it will definitely be a dampening factor as it had a material negative impact on the transport and logistics sector in October, with some follow-on impact into November and even into this month. But specifically on land transport, we saw quite a recovery in quarter three. Again, that was on the low base of all the troubles in KZN. You remember that the Toyota plant was also down, and it also impacted heavily on the ports operations in the second quarter. So that sort of recovery of activity afterwards, did fuel activity in quarter three. But overall, I think we will see further dampening effect on transport and logistics in quarter four. So, as much as we are positive about this quarter being slightly better than initially expected, i.e. not a negative number, not a contraction or a technical recession, I think quarter four could be a pretty mediocre quarter, given especially the transit strike and ongoing load shedding.
Given the current forecast, then, to what extent global matters an impact on the South African economic growth trajectory, particularly because we've seen world bodies, the likes of the IMF as well as the World Bank, indicating that South Africa is expected to grow at a far slower pace than what even the likes of the Reserve Bank has forecast.
Yes, indeed. So the global forces have been turning negatively in the last while. I mean, globally, we saw all countries struggling with high inflation, which has then triggered, central banks to hike interest rates. So that theme is playing out globally, and in the process, dampening economic growth numbers right through, all the developed economies and also in the developing economies. So we see a lot of pressure there. Also looking at China, that's very important to us as South Africa, given our commodity focus as a country. Now we've seen also that forecasts are being revised downwards for China's growth, especially given the zero COVID policy and the impact thereof on that side. So I think looking into next year, we're going to have even more pressure with less demand globally, which will also impact negatively on South Africa.
Lastly, what's to be said about the narrative of South Africa's economic growth in line with the high unemployment rate as well as the rising cost of living?
Unfortunately, we are under pressure given all those structural issues as well. So we've got the short-term events that we're talking about here, floods and so on. But then we've got the more structural story now, where we are looking at the population growing faster than economic growth. So we are not keeping up with providing services to our total population. And in the process, we are seeing that, economic welfare is over time declining as a result of that. So we do have our main problems as well. And we really need to focus on how we can stimulate economic growth, to create more jobs, to widen the net of people that can be economic active.
Just as a parting shot, Elize, let me squeeze in a question really about how the likes of the Reserve Bank as well as National Treasury will respond to the expected GDP numbers.
Well, in terms of the Reserve Bank, I think the number would be pretty much in line with the expectations. So I do not think there will be any particular impact from today's number on the Reserve Bank, say the deliberations on interest rates or so. I think it's expected. And even likewise on Treasury side, although I think, on the National Treasury side, they are very much aware of the fact that there's a structural unemployment rate that need to be addressed. And therefore, we have seen some improvement in terms of structural reform in the economy that will, over time, also lift employment rate.
That's where we leave it with independent economist Elize Kruger talking us through what's expected in the latest gross domestic product numbers expected from StatsSA in today's developments where business news is concerned. We are expecting those numbers from 11:30 this morning. That's it from the business desk. Back to Ayanda and Michelle.